Good morning. Welcome to this gorgeous day. Welcome to this special morning. Welcome to, I was thinking about it earlier, this historic experience. Over 200 years ago, when this meeting house was built, there was neither heating nor cooling available, and people would come into this exact same space with no heat whatsoever and keep their coats on and take in the service together. People went through a lot more hardship than we do these days, but we're keeping the doors and windows open so that we can still stay safe. We're keeping our coats on and enjoying the chance in our 301st year of our existence as a congregation, the chance to participate a little bit more authentically in the experience of our ancestors as we try to stay mindful of our history. Welcome to this day. May we make the very most of it, starting now together.
Please join me. The words are in your order of service for our Chalice Lighting. This light burns also in our hearts, and it lights our path toward harmony, justice, and hope for all.
And our invocation today is responsive. You'll find it in the back of your gray hymnal, number 579. So take a moment now to find it. Way in the back after all the music. The Limits of Tyrants, an excerpt from the writing of Frederick Douglass. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them. This is our time to greet one another, so I invite you, as always, to stand and look around. Stand as you're able. Look around, wave at the people sitting near you or far from you. Blow kisses to dear friends or utter strangers. Everyone deserves a warm greeting together this morning. Hello, everybody in the furthest corners, newcomers and longtime folks. And then let's, as always, turn our attention to the camera that they're waving the page over. Everybody who's with us at home, maybe scattered all over the country enjoying the last of your Thanksgivings. We miss you, and we're sending our very best to you, and we know you're sending your best back to us. So tonight is the first night of Hanukkah. We don't light the menorah before the holiday has started, but I think it is fair for us to light just the shamas, the servant candle. Some of us know from growing up, like me, being half Jewish, that when you're lighting the menorah, you light one candle, which is the shamas, and then you use that candle to light all the others across the 8 nights. So technically, a Hanukkah menorah has how many actual candles on it for the 8 nights of Hanukkah? 9, because you've got the shamas, the servant candle, and then one for each of the nights. Because Hanukkah hasn't started, we're not going to light any of the Hanukkah night candles, but we are going to light our shamas in anticipation of its service for the holiday. So I'm going to light the shamas, and then we'll do the blessing that one says for Hanukkah, and we're all going to participate it. You can see that we're going to do it in English and in phonetic Hebrew. So you've got the phonetic Hebrew written in English right under the English, so you can study up on that while I light our shamas. So can we join in the words in English? Blessed art thou, source of all, who has blessed us with a will toward the good and bound us to kindle Hanukkah lights. And in Hebrew, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu l'chadlich ner shel Hanukkah. And then the traditional Hanukkah song that is often sung, my family used to sing it every night when we lit our Hanukkah candles, is called Mia Milel, which is a celebration of the Hanukkah story, and our own Neil Bartholomew is going to sing that for us today.
Hallel gvurot Yisrael otan miyimne hen bechol dor yakum hagibor goel am miyim hallel gvurot Yisrael otan miyimne hen bechol dor yakum hagibor goel am Mayamin ha'em bazman hazeh Magabi Moshiach ufodeh Uvyamenu kol am Yisrael itached iacum veigael. Who can retell the things that befell us? Who can count them? In every age a hero or sage came to our aid. Who can retell the things that befell us? Who can count them? In every age a hero or sage came to our aid. At this time of year, in days of yore, Maccabees the temple did restore, and today our people, as we dreamed, will arise, unite, and be redeemed. Mi malel gvorot Israelotan, mi himne, en bechol dor yakum hagibor goel.
These are the joys and sorrows brought to our community today, sent either via email or written in our Joys and Sorrows book at the back of the meeting house. We have a candle for joy and a happy birthday to Betty Chan, a candle of gratitude that Reverend Roger has tested negative in the end and does not have COVID. A candle of sorrow for the death of my brother-in-law, Fran. He was the patriarch of the family and will be missed. At the end of his life, he was surrounded by loved ones to help him walk home. Best wishes and love to Dolores and her husband, John. A candle of sadness for Peter Willis, who succumbed in June to heat stroke after calling 911 for his sister for the same condition, saving her life but not his own. Survived by Linda Willis and Jolene Grove, and Susan Marks and Michael Willis. A joy and a sorrow for attending my first day of mourning in Plymouth, Mass. this Thanksgiving Day, the 52nd. A candle of joy that Reverend Ralph is okay, no COVID, and hopefully that John will be well soon. With all that is going on in my life currently, I am grateful to be with my kids because they give me my strength daily. In memory of my father, who died 19 years ago, and today it was Thanksgiving that day, and was a blessing to not watch his suffering anymore. A candle of wellness and peace for Mary Kolar after a recent hospitalization. A candle of healing for David Alden, who is in Hasbro Children's Hospital, and a candle of peace for his mother, Suzanne Alden, and cards are very welcome. A candle of sorrow, support, and sympathy from Jim Barfoot for his brother Paul, whose husband Steve lost his valiant struggle to beat multiple kinds of cancer this past Friday. This is our time for meditation and contemplation and prayer. Our words will be followed by silence for personal reflection and prayer. During that time of silence, if you have lost someone close to you in the past year, we invite you to stand or raise your hand in silent witness of that loss. And then we close with a musical interlude. Our meditation, like our reading today, is by the Unitarian Universalist minister Lynn Ungar. This is an excerpt from a piece of hers called By a Different Light. I do believe in miracles. I have no doubt that the unforeseen, even the unthinkable, breaks forth all the time. I have no doubt that our effort, our goodwill, our dedication to justice and truth and compassion have everything to do with how miracles come to be. Perhaps miracles don't just happen through our determined effort. Goodness knows that evil has prevailed in the face of any number of dedicated people of goodwill. Certainly, we can't expect miracles to just pop up and save us from our trials. Whatever the divine may be and however it works, I am pretty sure it isn't something like Superman that comes swooping in to snatch us from the jaws of doom every time we reach the dreadful climactic moment. Perhaps miracles, more than anything, happen in that middle space when our vision shifts and we see by a different light. Perhaps the Hanukkah miracle happened not simply because some people fought back, not simply because God intervened and made the oil burn longer. Maybe the miracle came when the Jews dared to think of themselves as a free people in spite of all the external evidence to the contrary. Maybe the miracle happened when they dared to believe, in spite of all appearances, that what they had really was enough. The word miracle comes from the Latin mirare, which means to see. Having a miracle is having a vision.
Come down from the hills, declare the fighting done. Be bold, declare victory. Even when the temple is wrecked, and the tyrants have not retreated, only coiled back like a snake prepared to strike again. Come down, try to remember a life gentled by daily acts of domestic faith. The pot set to boil, the bed made up, the table set in calm expectation that when the sun sets, we will still be here. Come down and settle. Unlearn the years of hiding. Light fires that can be seen for miles, that dance and spark and warm the frozen marrow. Set lamps in the window. Declare your presence, your loyalties, the truths for which you do not expect to have to die. It would take a miracle, you say, to carve such a solid life out of the shell of fear. I say you. You are the stuff from which such miracles are made.
Though the events that Hanukkah celebrates happened a long time ago, around 167 to 160 BCE, they are not a legend. They're history. They are recorded in many documents from that time. That's not prehistory. We know what happened then. So we know how it all went down, we know why, we know what else was going on in the area at the time, and all of this makes Hanukkah unique among all the Jewish festivals and celebrations. Unlike, say, the Exodus story, which is full of prophecies and miracles, Hanukkah is a story of mortal achievements and human events and human frailties. God's presence is at most implicit. not only in the Hanukkah story itself, but even in the story's transformation into a holiday. All the other Jewish holidays, bar none, come from portions of the Hebrew Bible where God says you will create and celebrate these sacred festivals. But it was human beings, rabbis, in fact, who decreed that Hanukkah should be a holiday. Not only is Hanukkah a human-scale story, but it's also full of familiar themes: assimilation, collaboration, identity, tradition, survival, inspiration, vengeance, zealotry, courage, justice, injustice, miracles, human greatness, human failings. It's about politics and religion. It's about schisms and unity. It's about change and regression. It's about tolerance and condemnation. It's about war and peace. And all those issues, you don't need me to tell you, are so contemporary. This is why Hanukkah is not a simple children's holiday or an outdated narrative from a primitive time. It is a timeless story with so much relevance. Every year, I look forward to plumbing the depths of Hanukkah for what else it can teach us. I've talked to you before about how things unfolded, but it's a complicated story, so I'm not going to pop quiz you on any of it. I'm just going to go ahead and tell it to you again, and hopefully there will be moments when you're like, yes, that's right, that's how that happened. So, Alexander the Great, who lived actually a couple hundred years before the events of Hanukkah, is the one who starts the story, because Alexander the Great, who started off in Greece and pushed his way eastward through also Judea and kept going all the way to parts of India to create his empire, brought Greek traditions, Hellenism, wherever he went. But he also was really interested in what I'm going to call multiculturalism. That is not, I'm sure, any of the words that they used for it back then. He was himself changed, and his troops were changed by the cultures they encountered. He got to Judea, and he was, at that time, he had been proclaimed a god king by the Egyptians already. And he was like, I am a god king, so you probably need to put a statue of me in your great temple in Jerusalem. And the Jews were like, we totally cannot do that, because that would be an idol. That's literally exactly what we cannot do at all. And he was like, oh, interesting idea. Okay. And because he didn't force them to do anything that was actually going to be incredibly desecrating of their religion, he actually was popular there. Most people who came in and took over were a lot more oppressive. In fact, Alexander is still a common Jewish name to this day because he was a fairly popular despot, if we can call him that. But he spread everything across that region and beyond. When he died, his great generals broke up the region. Ptolemy took Egypt and Jordan, and what is now Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, and promoted a lot more Hellenism in Judea. So things were becoming more and more involved with the ideas of the Greek polis, city-state. Traditions that were Greek were coming up more and more. There were three different kinds of Jews at the time. There were traditionalists who wanted Judaism that still felt contemporary and evolving. There were ultra-traditionalists who wanted old-school Judaism, which included something that was absolutely passive in the face of current events. People would just focus on their faith and nothing else. And there were assimilationists, sort of on the far other end, who were increasingly informed by the arts and philosophy and sophistication of Hellenistic Greek culture and traditions. And that kind of stayed in a balance until Judea was seized in battle by the descendants of a different Greek general, Seleucus. This was now the Seleucid Empire. They had everything from Syria to what is now Uzbekistan. Antiochus was the name of the original general. And what happened in Judea happened under Antiochus III and IV, which is that they got a lot harsher. They were not permissive and accepting like the Ptolemies. Among other things, they built a gymnasium right underneath the Temple Mount in Judea. So if this pulpit is the Temple Mount, like maybe down there, right where that curved pulpit is, that you could just see over the wall of the Temple Mount into the gymnasium. Do you know what the root of the word gymnasium means? Naked. Gymno is naked. Yeah, which is what people were when they were running around in the gymnasium exercising. So think about how that went down. Literally next door and visible from the Temple Mount is people running around exercising naked. Do you think that felt good to the traditionalists at the one sacred place that they could commune with their God in the entire world? No, it did not. But it got a lot worse than that. They started desecrating the temple. They set up sacred prostitution there. An altar, an image of Zeus was put up in the temple. Pigs were added to the sacrifices in the altar. It was kind of in your face. It was intentionally persecuting. He did this, Antiochus was doing this to put what he believed was a more relevant form of Judaism in place, in line with dominant religious values. Those who resisted were killed all over the province. Now, despite such dire consequences, or maybe because of them, resistance started to grow, especially once the people in Judea were rallied by a country priest named Mattathias and his sons, especially his eldest son, Judah Maccabee. Though faithful Jews, he and his sons also believed that it was clear they were no longer living in a time of prophecy and miracles. And so the covenantal relationship with God meant that people had a significant role to play. They could not just wait for God to part a sea, as had been possible in the old days. They had to get in the game rather than wait on God's salvation. And mostly the form of their action was what we would now call guerrilla warfare, especially because they were undersupplied in anything like weapons. They were undersized in numbers. They were completely untrained and unskilled. This was their only option. Counter to all expectations, they won a couple of victories against Antiochus IV's highly trained, highly skilled, highly resourced troops. And after those couple of remarkable victories, they began to gain momentum. And eventually, many Jews, traditionalists, ultra-Orthodox, the moderates, came together in an unprecedented coalition to support the struggle to save their faith and identity as a people. And against all odds, in the end, they won. Please tell me this sounds at least a little familiar to you at this point, yeah? Okay. So, I mean, maybe after many years you'll be like, oh my God, this is so boring. But hopefully also you've forgotten some details and you are having that, oh, that's right, that thing kind of a moment. They won. One of the first things they did was to cleanse and rededicate the temple on the 25th of the month of Kislev, 3 years to the day after the temple had been desecrated. And the dedication took, because there had been so much desecration, the dedication took 8 days of ceremonies and sacrifice. They decided it should be 8 days because it had originally taken Moses 8 days to dedicate the tabernacle, and Solomon 8 days to dedicate the temple at Sukkot, the first temple that had been built. So part of the ceremonies was rekindling the great candelabra that stood in the temple, and this is where the tradition of lighting a candelabra for Hanukkah comes from. After the Maccabees' victory, Mattathias' family created the Hasmonean dynasty. Their descendants ruled as both high priest and king together. Early on, there was dissent as to whether the freedom to practice Judaism was enough or whether they should push to now conquer and forcibly convert others living in Judea to Judaism. It was a split that would eventually wrench apart that fragile coalition that had won the victory into two sects. The Sadducees, who were concerned with priestly temple ritual, and the Pharisees, who were oriented towards teaching. They were the forerunners of modern Judaism's rabbinic traditions. Ultimately, the Hasmoneans did forcibly convert all the people in Judea to Judaism and attacked their detractors, especially the Pharisees. And the Pharisees retaliated the best they could, which meant within their tradition. So, for example, in the Jerusalem Talmud, which they created, there's the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, and they're both super important in Judaism. In the Jerusalem Talmud, which the Pharisees created, they introduced the idea, which is not true, that Jews light the menorah to commemorate miraculous oil that burned for 8 days. Probably you've all heard that, right? It's pretty popular. It's not actually the original story, and it's not what originally happened. The Pharisees put it in the Jerusalem Talmud, this idea that the miraculous oil burned for 8 days in the regained temple, and they make no mention of the Hasmoneans and their victorious leadership at all. That's where that story comes about. The Hasmoneans ruled this still squabbling Judea for generations until the Romans, as you may know, took over and appointed, of all people, Herod, that Herod, to rule Israel and the Jews. He was the first one who came in at the end of the Hasmonean dynasty. Now, every faith holds up a favorable lens to its holidays and history, right? Hanukkah celebrates regaining the right to practice Judaism, the miraculous David versus Goliath victory, only a couple of simple aspects of a very complicated story. And originally, the holiday was likewise simple, to be celebrated with rejoicing and merriment. And the tradition of lighting the menorah, reenacting the rededication of the temple, that's what lighting the menorah celebrates, not the miraculous oil. I really hope you take this in. Lighting the menorah celebrates the rededication, the 8-day rededication of the temple. The presents came way later than that. In a way, the holiday is arguably still unfolding, as are understandings of its meaning. And I have to confess, I often find postmodernism annoying, because the central belief of postmodernism is that there is no one version of any story, or that any one story is absolute, right, true. No one is wholly good, no one is wholly bad, nothing is clear-cut, nothing is simple. It is exhausting keeping up with all the postmodern details and nuances and complexities of everything. The Hanukkah story is very postmodern. And while that means that once you start paying attention, it's not easy to manage it all, it also means that the story feels very contemporary, which is maybe a gift, especially right now. A lot of ancient stories feel not just ancient and beautifully simple sometimes, but very dated, so dated as to feel irrelevant or even embarrassing by our modern standards and values. Not so Hanukkah. We know what it is to mistrust leaders. We know what it is to form and betray coalitions. We know what it is to waver between familiar traditionalism and broadening sophistication, to feel the pull of the accustomed and the challenge of the unknown, to be part of a nation that fears the future and idealizes the past, caught between one cultural identity that is itself an illusion and new identities and standards that threaten to annihilate old ways. If we compare Judea then and the United States now, Hanukkah celebrates, check this out, the victory of the conservatives. But even to say that is too simple, because it was also about people coming together across differences in support of what was most important to them all. And because nothing stands still, not even ancient Judea, after it was secured by the Hasmoneans and their coalition. There was no way to exist in the larger world without being in relationship with that larger world. So the stubborn, courageous, difficult Hasmoneans themselves became Hellenized over time. The Pharisees ultimately prevailed, though it took centuries. A couple of centuries later, the Romans destroyed the temple, that unique sacred center, the only place where Jews could commune with their God. And this gave the Pharisees a challenge, which they seized. Saving Jewish faith in the face of ultimate destruction, identifying not that one sacred center, but 2 new sacred centers for the faith. The synagogue, which in Greek literally means congregate. It's a verb. So congregation became one sacred center for the faith, anywhere Jews would gather to observe their faith. And the second one was the home, every home where Judaism was observed. The temple's sacrificial altar was replaced by the bima in the synagogue or the family table in the home, where a book, a sacred book, became the offering to be laid and opened and shared. A feast for the mind and a new offering to the soul and the divine. Without a temple, priests had no role, but teachers, rabbis, teachers can teach anywhere. Every year at Hanukkah, I think, am I really going to go over all that detail to tell a story some people don't care about and try to explain how it's really not about the oil that burned for 8 days and also really not a simple story about religious freedom fighters either, and try to lift up a story that I believe is still worth celebrating, and try to convey hundreds of years of somewhat obscure history in about 10 or 15 minutes, and then figure out what's the particular point of all that detail, which you guys may not even remember next year? With no blackboard? Now I'm dating myself. With no whiteboard? I'm still dating myself. With no PowerPoint? And every year the answer is yes. It is a fascinating and relevant story. And it's not just part of my heritage. It's not just part of my faith heritage, because Unitarian Universalism honors its Christian and Jewish heritage. It is also part of our nation's identity and part of our human challenge to learn from our human history. The lesson we may take from Hanukkah this year is about enduring, staying, and staying determined in the face of every challenge, even overwhelming challenge, believing so fiercely that when all hope is challenged, still we can find a new path. 2 paths, many paths, as much love, as much strength, as many new ways to support what we hold sacred as there is in each of our homes and all those who fill our homes. In every gathering, every synagogue of our people, ways and strength that cannot be razed to the ground or desecrated, ways and strength and care that we share with each other and will not abandon. They are like stepping stones for us to a new land, or minutes on the clock of a time when we will gather and no longer be in fear. With all the sufferings and wrongs that plague us, we lay some to rest every day and every year and every decade and every generation. We are advancing. All the good we believe in matters more now than ever. Neither history nor reality, not even our faith, asks us to be perfect. Nothing tells us we have to be perfect. Instead, we are all welcome, just as we are. And all that is asked of us is patience and perseverance and commitment and courage. None of it perfect, all of it real. May the story of Hanukkah remind us of the miraculous possibilities that answer such faithfulness, and renew our own hearts for the imperatives and blessings of our time. Happy Hanukkah. We have another one of my favorite Hanukkah songs, Ma'otzur, a very traditional Hanukkah song, a very contemporary arrangement by the artist Mark Cohn. He wrote Walking in Memphis, for those of us who are fans of that song. And he is, though that song has that line about, tell me, are you a Christian child? And he says, ma'am, I am tonight. He is Jewish, which is why his name is Mark Cohn, and this is his version of Ma'otzur. It is our offertory today, our thank you for your generosity this morning to the life and the work of this beloved synagogue, this beloved congregation and community. Thank you so much in advance for your generosity, for all that you give, and all that you do, and all that you are.
Just let our song praise your saving power. Thou amidst the raging foes, you were our sheltering tower, our sheltering tower. Ages, let our song praise thy saving power. Thou amidst the raging foes, you were our sheltering tower, our sheltering tower. Furious they assailed us, but thy arm availed us, and thy word broke their sword when our own strength failed us, and your word broke their sword when our own strength failed. Oh, Rock of Ages. Oh, yeah. Children of the wanderers, whether free or fettered, wake the echoes of the songs where you may be scattered, where you may be scattered. All right. Yours the message cheering that the time is nearing, which will see all men free and tyrants disappearing. I hope we see warm and free, and tyrants disappear. Wanna stand up on the ground. Rock away, yeah.
I feel trepidatious about our one invitation this morning. It feels so precious and challenged. Speaking of what is sacred and what is challenging at this time. But I'm really, really glad to say that we are planning to have in-person Christmas Eve services this year. There are going to be two. One will be at 5 in the afternoon and one will be at 10 at night. The first will have elements especially for children and families, as usual, and the second will have the traditional Christmas Eve songs and carols and tellings of the Christmas story. Both services will include special music and candle lighting. We will not be able to carol in the spaces, but after the second service, the deacons are hosting an outside reception on the lawn with hot mulled beverages, and there will be caroling outside following the second service. So we will have amazing music for you, just not caroling ourselves. Oh, humming is allowed though. We asked, and we can hum. So we're going to make it as rich and beautiful and wonderful as we possibly can. And because we have our protocols firmly in place, we are going to have to limit the attendance in the meeting house to under 400. That is less than we have at both services on Christmas Eve in past years. So everybody needs to make a reservation, and we encourage you to make them as soon as possible in order to make sure we're able to do this, including for people who don't always come to the church and are not familiar with current protocols. We're actually going to reserve a pew for everybody who's coming. You will have an actual particular pew, not just a number of pews for a number of people. You'll be assigned to a particular pew and escorted to it to make sure that we're spacing everybody out appropriately and taking the numbers of our parties into account so that we don't get over 400 and we can do this responsibly and just enjoy the service rather than worrying about what's happening covertly in the middle of the service. So you've got to make a reservation. We anticipate we will fill all spaces at both services. Please call the church office as soon as you can with your reservation. Make sure to number how many people will be in your party. And a member of the front desk staff is going to take down your information, map it all out, and then when you come on Christmas Eve to either of those services, you'll be taken to your place. Please come early at either service. There's going to be wonderful music before the second service, but in both cases, it's going to take a while to get everybody seated. So please come a little early so that you can have plenty of time to come find your seat, and it will be so good to see each other and be together. Our benediction today is also responsive, also in the gray hymnal, number 568 this time. And can we rise in body or spirit to say our benediction words together? So go ahead and take your time to find it, 568 in the way back again. This is a reading by Marge Piercy. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground. More than half a tree is spread in the soil under your feet. Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree. Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar. Live a life you can endure. Make love that is loving. Live as if you like yourself, and it may happen. This is how we are going to live for a long time, not always. Can we join in the words for our chalice lighting? Betty is going to lead us in them as she extinguishes the chalice. And then we have a closing song that we can hum to.
We carry the flame of
Of peace and love and hope
until we meet again.